Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Hoffa. It is Friday, May 10th, and this week, gig work is up, Uber gets out, and losses pile on. Legal Rideshare breaks it down. And of course, from Legal Rideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Brian Greeny. Brian, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jared. Great to be back and a sunny day in
A
Chicago.
sunny day and not in April. I guess time is going so fast. I thought it was still April. I'm crazy. I don't
It,
know.
we're almost halfway through the year. It's
I
crazy.
just cannot, I still can't believe that. I feel like we're still reeling from the last 2, 3 years. But here we are. And yet, of course, another crazy week in rideshare. You always think it's going to slow down. It does not. But we're going to start with some interesting news first. Gig workers are actually on the rise. It turns out as high-paying jobs are harder to find, workers are turning to rideshare. Now, this is from Business Insider, and they reported, quote, the share of Bank of America customers receiving income from ride-hailing nearly tripled from less than 0.4 in March of 2020 to about 1.2 of March, exceeding pre-pandemic levels. And this is according to Bank of America report. The Bank of America also found that many more Americans are going, quote, all in on gig work. The share of gig workers who receive gig income every month of the year increased from about 3% in the 12 months preceding February to 4% in the 12 months preceding this year. And much of that growth came from ride hailing. So, Brian, it looks like gig work is here to stay, and ride hailing, at least at the moment, is here to stay.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how the numbers fluctuate given the job market. This is not a surprise. We've seen this before when people are having more difficult times finding traditional jobs. The gig economy really booms. So it's nice that people have this option. That's really one of the reasons why uh, gig work took such a stronghold to begin with. Was people were looking for alternatives. People were having trouble finding traditional office jobs or service jobs or whatever it may be. And they said, hey, here's an opportunity. They liked it. They liked the flexibility. And one thing led to a number or another. And here we are today.
I think there's also another positive about this is that the larger that this grows, I think the more people are going to be aware of some of the inequalities and some of the issues that arise, as we all know about, and some of the, especially the veteran drivers and veteran gig workers know, is things like when accidents happen or they get injured or any sort of workers' comp. I think the more people that get involved in the gig work, it's going to be hard to turn a blind eye and say, well, we don't have to worry about it. I think they're going to have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. It's one of those things where people can turn a blind eye until they see it for themselves. So many people hear about the struggles that gig workers are going through, but until they actually get behind the wheel and have to deal with some of the safety issues, have to deal with some of the pay fluctuation, understand the wear and tear and the costs of maintenance on a vehicle and how that affects the bottom line, they're going to be motivated because it's hitting their lives and not just some story that they read on Business Insider or see on the news. So I think that's a really good point, Jared. And the more eyes, ears, and hands that we can get on this issue, the better off we're going to be. You know that I drove for Uber for a period of time for that exact reason. When we were opening up Legal Rideshare nearly a decade ago, I wanted to step into the shoes of our clients. I wanted to find out what the great parts of the job were, what the hard parts of the job were, where you feel vulnerable when you're in that profession. And just after a couple days, I couldn't believe how much more insight I had into the profession and how much more I could relate to the clients when they were telling me, this is what I'm going through. This is why I'm struggling. This is what I need help with. I'd been there, and it made me a better advocate. And I think it's going to make our community better advocates when more people find out exactly what this profession entails.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I forgot that you had done that, which is amazing. I wish more people would understand that, or at least or try that, or do that like you did, because, like you said, it opens your eyes to really what's going on out there. And we've been speaking to drivers for, like you said, 10 years. I've been at Legal Rideshare for quite a long time as well. So it's like it's you once you see what's happening, once it's not just a click article on, like you said, on Business Insider, it becomes very real, very tangible. So yeah, I think this could be a win on both sides, which is cool. I feel like we're going to move to the next article here. I feel like we can't talk about anything anymore in rideshare news or gig news without Minnesota. It's just it's everywhere. It's the topic. It's the topic of the topic. It turns out that Uber's threats have turned into a promise and escalated. This is from Fox 9, and they reported after Minnesota state legislators and Minneapolis city council members announced a compromise on wage legislation for Uber and Lyft drivers, the ride-hailing company is now threatening to leave Minnesota entirely. Previously, Lyft had only threatened to leave Minneapolis once the pay raise ordinance went into effect, but had planned to continue service in the rest of the metro and state. Uber had said it would leave Minneapolis and potentially the entire metro because of the ordinance. So, Bryant, they're really doubling down here, even with the ideas of the compromise. They're just saying we're just out. We're completely out of here.
Yeah, they're really digging in their heels, and I think they're doing this because they see Minnesota as a threat to be the first domino of many. They're trying to prevent these benefits that the legislature had agreed upon, had promised the drivers, that the drivers had secured. They see this as a template that other drivers in other cities and states could follow, and that could be really disruptive to their business model. So, you look at what they're doing in Minnesota, Minneapolis particularly, and the deal that they've struck is not nearly as expensive to Uber and Lyft as in other states, like in Washington, for instance. But they don't want this to be the first shoe that drops, where all of a sudden Wisconsin's following suit, and then Illinois, and then it's just spreading nationwide. So they're really putting a lot of money into this. Their threats are big. The fact that they could leave the entire state of Minnesota seems like a huge blow to two companies that are trying to turn a profit, and we'll get to that later. But I'm surprised that they're making that threat, but ultimately they must view this as an existential threat to their business model.
Yeah, and you're right, and they really have ramped up. This is, you and I have discussed this so many times in the past about the empty threats, and they always kind of push and pout, stomp their feet. This is a little different because, like you said, I think they see this as a major threat. And just to put it into context here, and this is mentioned in the article, one of the representatives, Jamie Long, who's in the negotiations here, he even said the newly agreed upon rates match rates in other states and are below rates in states where Uber and Lyft still operate. So they're not even saying, well, this is so insane that the rates are so high we can't afford it. They're saying we're just trying to negotiate something that other states already have, and in some cases it's below that threshold. And Uber is still saying, nope, that's not enough. We're not doing it.
Right. Something has really struck a chord here, where Uber sees the model that the drivers and the politicians have taken in Minneapolis, and they're scared of it. They're scared that this will replicate and spread. So they want to get ahead of it and make these threats, try to get this law squashed, try to strong arm an outcome that's better for them, so that other cities and other states don't follow suit. This is going to be a long and expensive battle for everybody involved. Ultimately, though, if Uber and Lyft do pack up, as we've talked about on other episodes, I'm confident that rideshare is not going anywhere in Minnesota. There are plenty of other companies ready to step up, ready to pay the drivers a livable wage, like the legislature has promised them. And the Uber and Lyft are eventually if they can pack up their bags, they can go. They're going to lose out on a big market share. And my guess is that they're back in a year if that's the path that they take, because it's just a lot of money to leave on the table.
Yeah, it is. And one thing that we haven't even talked about is that there's already officially at least one new ride-hailing company that's ready when they leave. They've already signed it, and there's a few other waiting for licenses in Minneapolis. So just like you said, the market's there. Someone's going to fill it, and they're not waiting to see what Uber and Lyft do. But there's actually, and this leads us to our final article, which is probably where this is all stemming from. Uber starts 2024 with a crash, and this is from The Verge, and they explain, quote, in 2023, Uber achieved an important milestone, earning more money than it spent for a full year for the first time. It was widely seen as a sign that the potentially cash-strapped business was finally on a more sustainable path. However, today there are signs that the journey may be longer than we thought. The ride-hailing and delivery company reported a surprise net loss of $654 million for the first quarter of the year as legal settlements and equity investments proved to be more of a drag on Uber's business model than many expected. So, Brian, I think maybe this is what struck the chord. This might be the thing.
Well, I can tell you that these legal fights are not cheap. So perhaps all this money that they're putting into fighting fair pay and fighting better conditions is actually costing them in their bottom line. I am almost certain that they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in fighting in Minnesota and other similar battles. So that those numbers add up quickly. And one thing that has been a double-edged sword for Uber has been the diversification of its business model. So during the pandemic, they really survived in a way that where Lyft struggled because they had so many different options. They were doing rideshare, they were doing delivery, they had their hand in 1,000 different pots. It seems that maybe as we've exited the pandemic and rideshare has really picked up, that maybe now they're over diversified. Maybe they need to start focusing more on core business models rather than trying to be the quote unquote Uber of everything. I can see them turning a profit like they did last year by focusing on their strengths, delivery, rideshare, maybe a couple other things. I don't think they need to be in the helicopter business like we saw them trying to get to a while ago. So it's still a company that's trying to find its way, but ultimately, we've seen last year that they can turn a profit. We know that the industry is not going anywhere. We know that demand is still strong. So I'm confident that if they spend their money the right way, perhaps not by fighting things like the ordinances in Minneapolis, that there's going to be a bright future for them down the road.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right about that because the article discusses this. I mean, it says, some of the core aspects of Uber's business model appear to be strong. Uber's gross bookings or the value of transactions on its app grew 20%. Revenue was also up 15%. And just as you said, like the company, they say in the article here, the company has spent tens of billions of dollars to oppose efforts of giving drivers and gig workers any sort of protections. And yet it says, of course, occasionally it does win, but it's not putting any of this to rest. So it's like whack-a-mole, where it's like, okay, fine, you spent all of this money, and maybe you snuffed out kind of an uprising of equality here on this side, but then you got this side, and it pops up here. And so you I don't know, they gotta find some sort of even ground here because they're telling you now, literally, it's killing them.
Well, maybe the answer is to find a solution that makes the drivers happy. Right now, as you said, they're playing whack-a-mole every time that there's an ordinance that pops up. Maybe it's find a number in terms of pay that everybody can agree on is fair and fairly compensates the drivers, allows them to pay for the maintenance that they need to on their vehicles, allows them to gas up their cars, and at the same time take home enough money to keep a roof over their head and food on their table. And if they can just come to that number, make those deals in cities nationwide, put this to rest, they know what it will then cost them to operate a business that works for them and works for the driver, and then they can focus on other issues to become profitable. But as they continue to try to strong arm politicians, try to take money out of the pots of drivers, it's not a sustainable long-term solution. It's just a temporary holds drivers down and costs them billions. I don't know how you run a business that way. Let's just fix the costs. Let's understand, like most businesses do, what labor costs, and then work for ways to find money around that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's what they're going to have to do. I just don't see another way around this. I mean, this article is stating they're losing by just not doing that, by not finding common ground. Uh, we'll see. It's going to be an interesting Q1 for Uber, I'll tell you that. So um, that's the stories for this week. But I'll give you the final word here, Bryant, before we head off for the weekend.
As always, we like to remind everybody that Legal Rideshare is ready and available to help if you find yourself involved in an accident in an Uber, Lyft, or any other gig-related activity. We help drivers, passengers, victims, anybody who suffers an injury on the road or doing the job. So please reach out to us. LegalRideshare.com is the best way to find our contact information. And we are ready for any phone call and ready to give a free consultation to make sure that you set yourself up for success.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryant. And as I like to say, that is the end of this week in Rideshare. See you next week.